The hum of the quantum servers was the only lullaby Eva had known for the past 3 years. In the sterile, blindingly white expanse of the Alpha Bio laboratory, she looked less like a prisoner of her work and more like its priestess. Eva adjusted the haptic interface gloves, her dark skin stark against the glowing blue filaments of the machinery. She was a genius, a prodigy in biochemistry who had graduated high school at 12 and finished her second doctorate by 22, yet she possessed a demeanor that disarmed everyone she met. Large, expressive eyes and a soft, hesitant voice made her appear harmless, even naive. It was a useful camouflage in a world dominated by ruthless academic politics and cutthroat corporate espionage. But tonight, the stakes were higher than tenure or grants. Tonight, the investor was coming. Heart rate at 65, cortisol levels negligible, dopamine rising, Eva whispered to herself, reading the holographic display hovering above the wrist of a volunteer student. The device, a thin, translucent membrane adhering to the subject's radial artery, was her life's work, the chimera sensor. It didn't just read pulses, it read the chemical cocktail of the soul. It could predict an emotional spike before the brain even registered the feeling. It was designed to treat severe PTSD and nonverbal autism, to give a voice to the voiceless. Or at least, that was what Eva had written in the grant proposals. The sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed down the corridor, silencing the hum of the servers. The heavy security doors hissed open. Eva turned, clutching her tablet like a shield. 3 men entered. 2 were clearly bodyguards, bulky, wearing earpieces, their suits straining against muscle. But the man in the middle absorbed all the light in the room. He was tall, leaning with a predatory elegance, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Eva's entire education. His hair was pitch black, swept back to reveal sharp, angular features and eyes that were cold, calculating, and terrifyingly intelligent. This was Mr. Park, her benefactor, the man who had poured millions into her research without ever stepping foot in the lab until now. "Dr. Eva Banks," he said, his voice a deep, smooth baritone that carried a faint, clipped accent. "You look smaller than in your file." "Mr. Park," Eva stammered, adjusting her glasses. I didn't expect you until the prototype was fully calibrated." "Kaijin," he corrected, walking past her to inspect the holographic display. He didn't look at the volunteer, he looked at the data streams. "Park is for the tax auditors. You will call me Kaijin." Eva froze. The name triggered a memory, a flash of a news report she had seen on a muted TV in a coffee shop weeks ago. Kaijin. The name whispered in connection with the shadowy underbelly of Seoul's organized crime, a man rumored to control the logistics of half the Pacific Rim. They called him the Ghost of Busan. Police reports described him as a ruthless tactician who had modernized the Korean syndicate into a global corporate empire. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't working for a venture capitalist. She was working for a mob boss. She watched him trace the air, manipulating the hologram. "You told my intermediaries this device translates emotion into data," Kaijin said, his back to her. "Show me." Eva swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she typed a command. I will induce a mild stress response in the subject." She nodded to the student, who had been briefed to recall a frightening memory. Instantly, the hologram shifted from cool blues to jagged spikes of crimson and violet. "The sensor detects the adrenal surge and the specific neuropeptides associated with fear," Eva explained, her voice gaining strength as she spoke of her science. "It creates a predictive model. We know he is afraid before he even frowns." Kaijin turned to her, a slow, terrifying smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a smile of wonder, it was the smile of a wolf finding a wounded deer. "It is not a therapy device, Eva," he said softly, stepping into her personal space. She could smell him, expensive leather, tobacco, and something metallic like rain on cold steel. "It is the end of deception. No one can lie to this. No business partner, no rival, no traitor. You haven't built a medical tool. You've built the ultimate leash." Eva stepped back, clutching the tablet tighter. "No, that's not. That violates the bioethics charter. It's for medical use only. The data is encrypted to protect the user's privacy." Kaijin laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Privacy is a luxury of the poor. I paid for this, Eva. I own the tech, and effectively I own you." He reached out, his fingers brushing against the ID badge clipped to her lab coat. The touch was light, but it felt electric, invasive. "You will pack the prototype and the core drive. We are leaving." "I won't," Eva said, her voice shaking but stubborn. "I won't let you turn this into a weapon." The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kaijin's eyes narrowed. Before he could speak, the building shuddered. A deafening boom ripped through the ventilation shafts, followed instantly by the shattering of the reinforced glass observation window. One of the bodyguards' heads snapped back, red mist spraying the pristine white floor as a sniper bullet found its mark. Chaos erupted. The alarms blared, a discordant scream against the sudden roar of fire. "Get down!" Kaijin roared, his corporate veneer vanishing to reveal the street fighter beneath. He lunged at Eva, tackling her to the linoleum floor just as a hail of automatic gunfire chewed up the servers where she had been standing seconds ago. "My work!" Eva screamed, reaching for the console as sparks rained down like fireworks. "Forget the servers." Kaijin dragged her up, his grip like iron around her arm. He pulled a handgun from inside his jacket, a sleek custom piece, and fired 3 precise shots into the smoke filling the corridor. "They're here for me or the tech. Either way, you're dead if you stay." Eva was paralyzed. The heat from the explosion was already blistering. Her naive, sheltered world of pipettes and peer reviews was burning down around her. She looked at the destruction, then at the man pulling her. He was a monster, she knew that, but he was the only thing standing between her and the abyss. "The sensor," she gasped, grabbing the portable interface unit and the sensor membrane she had peeled off the terrified volunteer, who had long since bolted. "I have the prototype." "Move." Kaijin shoved her toward the emergency exit. They ran through the bowels of the burning building, Kaijin moving with a terrifying efficiency, dispatching a masked gunman at the stairwell with a brutal fluid motion that made Eva nauseous. They burst out onto the roof, the night air whipping Eva's hair across her face. A black helicopter, unmarking and sleek, was already hovering, its rotors slicing the smoke. Kaijin practically threw her into the cabin before climbing in behind her. "Go," he shouted to the pilot. As the chopper ascended, Eva looked down. Her laboratory, her home, was an inferno. The flames reflected in the dark glass of the helicopter window and in Kaijin's eyes. He wasn't looking at the fire with fear. He was calculating the loss, the cost of retribution. He holstered his weapon and adjusted his cuffs, his breathing barely elevated. He looked at her, huddled in the corner of the leather seat, clutching the small metal case containing the Chimera sensor. "You have a choice, Dr. Banks," Kaijin said, his voice calm over the headset. "You can view this as a kidnapping, in which case you will spend the rest of your short life terrified, or you can view this as a promotion." "Where are we going?" Eva whispered, staring at the dark ocean stretching out beneath them. "To the Citadel," Kaijin replied. "My private facility in the East Sea. No laws, no ethics committees, no rivals, just you, me, and the chemistry." Eva looked down at the sensor case in her lap. She felt a tear slide down her cheek, but inside a gear turned. Her naivety, the wide-eyed fear she projected so well, was a habit, a survival mechanism she had perfected in foster homes and male-dominated universities. But it wasn't the whole truth. Kaijin thought he had rescued a frightened rabbit. He didn't know that she had anticipated a day like this. He didn't know about the lines of code she had buried deep in the Chimera's algorithm, the error she had mathematically ensured. "I'm your prisoner," she said softly, turning her large, watery eyes toward him. Kaijin leaned forward, captivated by her apparent fragility. "You are my asset, Eva, and I take very good care of my assets." The helicopter banked, speeding toward the horizon where a dark, jagged island silhouette cut through the moonlight. The trap was set. But as they flew into the darkness, it wasn't entirely clear who had set it for whom. Eva clutched the sensor. It was active. Even inside the case, the biofeedback loop was searching for a signal, and in the cramped cabin, high above the ocean, the only two signals it could find were hers and his. The Citadel was a fortress masquerading as a paradise. As the helicopter touched down on the reinforced concrete pad, Eva saw that Kaijin's villa was a brutalist masterpiece of gray stone and glass, carved directly into the basalt cliffs of the island. It overlooked a churning, dark sea that seemed to isolate them from the rest of reality. There were guards, of course, men who moved like shadows in the periphery, heavily armed and silent. But the true walls of this prison were the miles of ocean in every direction. Eva was escorted not to a dungeon, but to a suite that rivaled the finest hotels in Seoul. Silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wardrobe filled with clothes in her exact size, a detail that chilled her more than the guns. It implied he had been watching her long enough to know her measurements, but she didn't have time to dwell on the luxury. The next morning, Kaijin didn't invite her to breakfast. He summoned her to the sub-basement. The elevator descent was long, the air growing cooler and recycled. When the doors slid open, Eva gasped. It wasn't just a lab, it was a playground for a god. The equipment here was generations ahead of what she had at the university. Centrifuges, mass spectrometers, a quantum computing cluster that hummed with a low, throbbing power. And in the center of the room, a singular, glass-walled observation pod. Kaijin was waiting for her. He had shed the suit jacket, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint, jagged scars that hinted at a violent history. He looked at home here, amidst the chrome and steel, a predator in his den. "You have everything you need," Kaijin said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "My engineers recovered your local backups from the cloud before your lab burned. The source code is on that terminal." Eva walked slowly into the room, touching the cold surface of a workbench. She had to play the part. She let her shoulders hunch slightly, keeping her eyes wide and darting. It will take weeks to recalibrate the Chimera sensor. The hardware was damaged in the escape. "You have 2 days," Kaijin said, his tone brokering no argument. He walked over to her, towering over her small frame. "I have a meeting with the Triad heads in 3 days. They are restless. I intend to use the sensor during the negotiations. I need to know who is loyal and who is planning to put a knife in my back." "It's not ready for field use," Eva protested, her voice rising in a feigned panic. "The biofeedback loop. It hasn't been tested on human subjects for prolonged periods. The neurochemical drift could be dangerous." Kaijin stepped closer, trapping her against the desk. He placed a hand on the surface on either side of her, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. "Then we test it, here, now." "I need a subject," Eva whispered, clutching her clipboard to her chest. "You have one," Kaijin replied, "me." Eva's heart skipped a legitimate beat. This was faster than she had anticipated. But the subject needs to be passive, vulnerable." "I am never vulnerable," Kaijin said darkly. "Strap me in." 20 minutes later, the atmosphere in the lab had shifted from sterile to suffocatingly tense. Kaijin sat in the medical chair inside the glass pod, his shirt unbuttoned to allow Eva to attach the adhesive sensor nodes to his chest, his temples, and the pulse points of his wrists. Her hands trembled, partly an act, partly genuine reaction to the heat radiating from his skin. He was like a furnace. Every time her fingers grazed his skin, he watched her, his gaze intense, analyzing her every micro-expression. "The interface," Eva said, her voice shaky. She pulled on the haptic gloves and the headset that would allow her to visualize and feel his emotional data. "I'm initializing the link. You might feel a slight prickling sensation at the base of your skull." She retreated to the control console outside the glass wall. She typed in the activation sequence. This was it. The moment she had engineered. The code she had secretly inserted, the Ghost Protocol, she called it, was designed to do more than read. It was designed to resonate. In nature, when two frequencies align perfectly, they amplify each other. She had programmed the chimera to create a biochemical bridge. If the sensor read high dopamine in the subject, it would stimulate the operator's neural pathways to mirror it, creating a feedback loop that grew stronger the longer the connection lasted. She intended to use it to make him trust her, to make him feel a manufactured empathy so deep he wouldn't be able to hurt her. She hit enter. The hum of the quantum computer pitched up. Inside the pod, Kaijin stiffened. "Status," he demanded, his voice tight. "Calibrating," Eva said, watching the screens. "Resting heart rate, 50, incredibly low, cortisol, non-existent." Then the data stream shifted. A wave of red and gold washed over her monitor. "I'm injecting the stimulus," Eva lied. She wasn't injecting anything. She was activating the loop. Suddenly, Eva gasped. A jolt of electricity seemed to shoot up her arms from the haptic gloves. It wasn't pain. It was a physical sensation of pure, raw power. She felt a sudden surge of confidence and aggression that wasn't hers. It was his. She was feeling his dominance. Inside the pod, Kaijin's eyes widened. He gripped the armrests of the chair, his knuckles turning white. He didn't just feel the sensor reading him, he felt her. But not the scared little scientist he thought he knew. He felt a spike of adrenaline, a sharp, calculating intelligence that felt like ice water in his veins. "What is this?" Kaijin growled, trying to rip the sensors off his chest, but his hands wouldn't obey. His body was locked in the feedback. "Don't fight it," Eva commanded, her voice dropping an octave, losing its waver. She didn't mean to sound so authoritative, but his emotions were bleeding into hers. "If you break the connection abruptly, the neural shock could kill you." "I feel," Kaijin gritted his teeth, his head thrown back. "I feel you." The loop tightened. The air between the glass partitions seemed to shimmer. Eva stared at him, and for the first time she didn't see a monster. She felt a profound, aching isolation. Beneath the armor of the crime lord, beneath the violence and the money, was a cavernous loneliness that knocked the wind out of her. It hit her like a physical blow, bringing tears to her eyes instantly. He was a king on a throne of ice, trusting no one, loved by no one. And he felt her too. Kaijin gasped as a wave of softness hit him, not weakness but a terrifyingly complex web of fear, determination, and a strange, burning attraction. He felt her deception, though he couldn't identify what it was. He felt that she was hiding something massive, something dangerous, and instead of anger it triggered a primal intrigue in him. "Eva," he whispered, though she heard it clearly through the headset. "Focus on my voice, Kaijin," she said, her hands flying over the controls, trying to stabilize the loop. It was too strong. The algorithm was working too well. She had meant to create a subtle bond, a leash. Instead, she had forged a chain that was dragging them both into the deep end. "Breath. Regulate your heart rate." "I can't," he rasped. "You're everywhere." The biochemical synchronization reached a crescendo. Eva felt a phantom touch on her cheek, hot and rough, though he was 10 feet away behind glass. Her own heart rate skyrocketed to match his, the two rhythms falling into a perfect, thundering sync. Thump, 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 thump. Suddenly, the system alarm blared, neurotoxicity warning. The intensity was too high for a first test. "I'm aborting," Eva yelled, slamming the emergency kill switch. The connection severed instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. Eva ripped the headset off, gasping for air as if she had just surfaced from a deep dive. She was sweating, her body trembling with the aftershocks of his emotions. Inside the pod, Kaijin slumped forward in the chair, his chest heaving. He looked at his hands, then slowly lifted his head to look through the glass. His gaze was different now. The cold calculation was gone, replaced by a dark, ravenous hunger. He had tasted her soul, and he knew she had tasted his. The glass door of the pod hissed open. Kaijin stood up, unsteadily at first, then regaining his composure with terrifying speed. He ripped the adhesive pads from his chest, ignoring the red welts they left behind. He marched out of the pod, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. Eva backed up until she hit the console, trapped. The parameters need adjustment, she stammered, trying to rebuild her walls, trying to look naive again. But it was harder now, he knew. He had felt the steel in her spine. Kaijin stopped inches from her. He didn't touch her, but the air around them crackled with the residual static of the connection. "You lied," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That wasn't a diagnostic, that was an invasion." "It's the side effect," Eva lied desperately, her eyes locked on his throat. "I told you, unpredictable attachment. It creates a temporary bridge." "Temporary?" Kaijin reached out, his hand hovering near her face, tracing the line of her jaw without making contact. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. It didn't feel temporary, Eva. It felt like inevitability. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "You are not just a scientist, are you? I felt it, the planning, the strategy. You're playing a game." Eva froze. He had seen too much. But Kaijin pulled back, looking into her eyes with a smirk that was equal parts danger and desire. "I enjoy games, especially when the stakes are life and death." He turned and walked toward the elevator, buttoning his shirt. "Clean up the data. We try again tonight. And Eva," he paused at the doors. "Next time, don't try to hide the pleasure. I felt that too." The doors closed, leaving Eva alone in the humming lab. She sank to the floor, her legs giving out. She touched her own chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heart. The plan was working, but with a disastrous variable she hadn't accounted for. She wasn't just trapping him. She was falling for the very monster she intended to tame. And worse, he liked the trap. The line between science and madness had officially blurred. Over the next 3 days, the sessions in the sub-basement became the only reality that mattered. The Ghost Protocol was no longer just a feedback loop. It was a rewiring of their very existence. Eva found herself waking up in the middle of the night, gasping, her skin burning with a phantom touch that belonged to Kaijin, who was sleeping 3 floors above. She could feel his insomnia, his brooding ambition, and the jagged edges of his paranoia as if they were her own intrusive thoughts. And she knew he felt her too. When she felt anxiety, his security detail would double outside her door within minutes. They were becoming quantum entangled, 2 particles unable to exist independently. On the 4th evening, the dynamic shifted. The sterile lab coats were gone. Eva stood before a full-length mirror in her suite, staring at a stranger. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that hugged every curve, the back cut dangerously low, revealing the dark, glowing skin of her spine. It was a gift from Kaijin, left on her bed with a note. "Wear this. Tonight we enter the lion's den." She wasn't just an asset anymore, she was armor. She affixed the miniaturized version of the sensor, a discreet, jeweled choker that sat tight against her throat, reading her pulse and vocal vibrations, while a microscopic earpiece connected her to Kaijin. The main processing unit was hidden in her clutch purse. A knock at the door. Kaijin entered. He stopped dead, the air leaving his lungs in a rush that Eva felt physically in her own chest. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, but his eyes were wild, dilated with the unique cocktail of adrenaline and obsession the sensor induced. He walked to her, standing behind her reflection in the mirror. "You look," he struggled for the word, his hands hovering over her bare shoulders, the heat radiating off him. "Dangerous." "The meeting with the triads," Eva said, her voice steady despite the chaotic thumping of her heart. "You want me to scan them?" "Chairman Wei is old school. He smiles with his mouth and kills with his eyes," Kaijin murmured, leaning down to kiss the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. The sensation sent a jolt of pleasure through the link so strong Eva's knees buckled. He caught her, his grip firm. "I need to know if he intends to honor the territory pact. If the sensor detects betrayal, you give the signal. 1 tap on the earpiece." "And if I do?" Eva asked, turning to face him. "Then I burn the room down," Kaijin said simply. The gala was held in the Citadel's Grand Hall, a glass-walled atrium suspended over the crashing waves. It was filled with the most dangerous men in Asia, triad leaders, Yakuza oyabunds, and corrupt officials. The air smelled of expensive scotch and suppressed violence. Eva walked on Kaijin's arm, playing the role of the silent, beautiful companion. But beneath the surface, she was screaming. The data from the room was overwhelming. The sensor picked up spikes of fear, greed, and lust from every direction, flooding her mind with a cacophony of emotional noise. Focus, Kaijin's voice cut through the noise in her ear, grounding her. Only Wei. They sat at the main table. Chairman Wei was a small, elderly man with a benevolent smile that didn't reach his eyes. As the waiters poured wine, Wei spoke of peace, of shared profits, of a new era of cooperation. Eva watched the readout on her phone, concealed under a napkin. Heart rate steady, galvanic skin response flat. He's telling the truth, Eva whispered into her comms. He wants peace. Kaijin relaxed slightly, raising his glass. To the future chairman. But then the data stream glitch. A sudden, violent spike of anticipation and malice, but it didn't come from Wei. Eva frowned, adjusting the range on her clutch. The signal was coming from behind them. She scanned the room. The spike wasn't from the rivals. It was coming from Kaijin's own lieutenant, his head of security, standing by the door. Target, Lieutenant Han. Emotion, lethal intent. Adrenaline peaking. Kaijin, Eva screamed, abandoning the comms. It's a trap, Han. The warning came half a second too late. The lights died. Gunfire erupted, deafening and close. A bullet shattered the wine glass in Kaijin's hand. He didn't hesitate. Driven by the sensor's heightened reflexes and Eva's precognitive warning, he flipped the heavy oak table, dragging Eva down behind it just as the wood splintered under a hail of submachine gun fire. Han turned, Kaijin roared, pulling his handgun. Wei is in on it. Across the room, Chairman Wei was being ushered out by his own guards, leaving his men to slaughter Kaijin's loyalists. It was a coup. We need to move, Eva yelled. She wasn't the scared scientist anymore. The sensor was pumping Kaijin's combat instincts directly into her nervous system. She saw the tactical map of the room as he did. She knew where the cover was. She knew where the kill zones were. They moved as one organism. Kaijin provided covering fire, his shots impossibly precise, dropping 2 attackers in the shadows. Eva scrambled toward the service exit, but a gunman emerged from the kitchen, leveling a shotgun at her. Before she could scream, Kaijin was there. He didn't shoot, he was out of ammo. He threw himself between Eva and the gunman, taking the brunt of the tackle, driving the assassin into the wall. They struggled for the weapon. Eva felt Kaijin's pain, a sharp rib-cracking impact as if it were hers. She also felt his desperation. He's losing leverage. She saw a discarded steak knife on the floor. Without thinking, possessed by a cold, borrowed fury, Eva grabbed the knife and drove it into the assassin's leg. The man screamed, his grip loosening. Kaijin snapped the man's neck with a brutal, efficient motion. He spun around, chest heaving, blood, not his own, splattered across his white shirt. He looked at Eva, who was standing there, shaking, the bloody knife still in her hand. Kaijin started, but there was no time. More coming, East Corridor. Rage and fear, Eva said, the data scrolling behind her eyes. She could feel the enemy approaching. 3 men. Go, Kaijin grabbed her hand, interlacing their fingers. They ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the Citadel. This was his home, but it had become a hunting ground. They bypassed the elevators, taking the service stairs down toward the sea caves beneath the villa. The sensor link was going haywire, amplifying everything. Every time Kaijin shot an enemy, Eva felt the recoil in her arms. Every time Eva stumbled, Kaijin's arm shot out to steady her before he even saw her fall. They were perfectly synchronized, a dance of death and survival. They burst into the boathouse, a cavernous natural cave converted into a dock. A sleek speedboat bobbed in the dark water. Get in, Kaijin ordered, unmooring the rope. But the metal door behind them groaned and buckled. They were cutting through with a torch. "They'll be on us in 10 seconds, Kaijin said, looking at the boat, then at Eva. "The boat has a geolock. I need 30 seconds to bypass it." "We don't have 30 seconds, Eva said, looking at the glowing red metal of the door. She felt his fear now, not for himself, for her. It washed over her, a tidal wave of protective terror that brought her to her knees. He was planning to stay behind. He was planning to hold them off so she could drift out on the current. "No," Eva said, grabbing his face, forcing him to look at her. The sensor choker at her throat pulsed with a blue light. "We fight, or we leave together." "Eva, listen to me." "I am in your head, Kaijin," she shouted, her voice echoing in the cave. "I know what you're thinking. You think you deserve to die here. You think this is your karma, but I am not letting you go." The door blasted open. Smoke filled the cave. Kaijin looked at her, and in that moment the last barrier broke. He didn't just see an asset. He saw his equal. He saw the only person in the world who truly knew him. He grabbed a submachine gun from a dead guard stashed near the boat. "Start the engine. I'll buy us the time." Eva jumped into the boat, ripping the dashboard panel open. Her fingers flew across the wires. She was a bioengineer, but circuitry was circuitry. She hot-wired the ignition just as bullets began to ping off the water around them. Kaijin was a demon, firing bursts into the smoke, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. "Now," Eva screamed, gunning the engine. Kaijin leaped from the dock, catching the railing of the boat as it sped away. He hauled himself up, wet and bleeding, collapsing onto the leather seat beside her. They sped out into the open ocean, the dark silhouette of the citadel shrinking behind them, flames now licking from the windows of the grand hall. Eva steered them into the darkness, guided only by the stars and the adrenaline crash that was beginning to set in. Once they were miles out, silence reclaimed the world. The only sound was the slap of the hull against the waves and their ragged breathing. Kaijin sat up, wincing as he touched a graze on his cheek. He looked at Eva. She was disheveled, her dress torn, covered in grease and blood, staring ahead with a fierce determination. He moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. He reached out and took the wheel from her hands, cutting the engine. The boat drifted. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You could have let them kill me. You would have been free." Eva turned to him. The sensor link was still active, humming low and steady, a warm current connecting their hearts. "I don't know where I end and you begin anymore, Kaijin." He stared at her, the moonlight reflecting in his dark eyes. Then he surged forward. It wasn't gentle. He grabbed the back of her neck and crashed his lips onto hers. It was a kiss of desperation, of survival, of two people who had just walked through fire and refused to burn. Eva kissed him back with equal force, her hands tangling in his wet hair. The feedback loop exploded, lust, relief, and a profound, terrifying love amplifying between them until the world dissolved. They weren't just operator and subject. They were the singularity. And as they drifted in the dark ocean, with his enemies behind them and an uncertain future ahead, Eva realized the terrifying truth. The error in her calculations wasn't a bug. It was fate. The fishing trawler that smuggled them into the neon-drenched underbelly of Macau smelled of diesel and dead fish, a stark contrast to the sterile white labs Eva had once called home. But as she stepped onto the rotting wood of the dock, shivering in the humid night air, she felt more alive than she ever had under the fluorescent lights of academia. Beside her, Kaijin moved with a stiff, predatory grace. He was wounded, a deep graze on his ribs from the boat chase. But through the Chimera sensor's link, Eva didn't just see the injury. She felt the dull, throbbing ache in her own side. She also felt his burning determination to keep her safe, a protective fury that tasted like iron in her mouth. "The safe house is 3 blocks inland," Kaijin murmured, scanning the shadows. "Old quarter. My network is fractured, but this location is off the books. Han doesn't know about it." He knows the sensor is active, Eva whispered, tapping the choker at her throat. I can feel the static. Someone is scanning for the unique frequency of the quantum processor. If we stay linked, they'll find us. If we unlink, we lose our advantage, Kaijin countered, his hand brushing the small of her back as he guided her into a narrow, rain-slicked alley. Without the synchronization, we are just one injured man and a civilian against an army. Eva stopped, grabbing his arm. The neon sign of a noodle shop flickered above them, casting his face in intermittent red light. I'm not a civilian anymore, Kaijin, and you're not just a thug. We are something else. She pulled a small tablet from her ruined clutch. I can't mask the signal, but I can invert it. I can turn the sensor into a beacon, yes, but also a trap. Kaijin looked at her, and through the link, she felt a surge of pride that nearly brought her to her knees. What are you planning, Dr. Banks? Han wants the tech, she said, her eyes narrowing. Let's give him a demonstration. The safe house was a dusty, cramped apartment above a laundromat. While Kaijin raided a hidden cache of weapons under the floorboards, loading magazines with a rhythmic, terrifying efficiency, Eva sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stripped wires and the core processor of the Chimera unit. She worked with feverish intensity. The naivety that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating brilliance. She wasn't just fixing the sensor. She was weaponizing the feedback loop. It's done, she announced an hour later. I've removed the safety limiters. If we activate the Ghost protocol now, it won't just sync our emotions. It will sync our sensory inputs. You will see what I see. I will hear what you hear. 360-degree awareness. But Kaijin, the neural load will be massive. If we hold it for more than 10 minutes, we risk a total synaptic collapse. We could stroke out. Kaijin walked over, sliding a fresh clip into a heavy pistol. He looked at the device, then at her. 10 minutes is all I need to kill Han. The wait was short. Han, the traitorous lieutenant, was efficient. He had tracked the signal just as Eva intended. At 3:00 a.m., the silence of the alley was broken by the squeal of tires and the heavy tread of boots. Eva checked the tablet. 6 heat signatures. Entering the building. Han is leading them. Time to start the experiment, Kaijin said. He activated his earpiece. Eva tapped the choker. The world exploded into clarity. It wasn't like the previous sessions. This was total immersion. Eva gasped as her vision doubled. She could see the door in front of her, but she could also see herself from Kaijin's perspective across the room. She could hear the heartbeat of the man creeping up the stairs. She felt the cold steel of the gun in Kaijin's hand as if she were holding it. They were no longer two people. They were a dual-core processor of violence. The door burst open. Flashbangs rolled in. For anyone else, the blinding light and deafening noise would have been fatal. But Eva and Kaijin moved before the grenades even detonated. They were already moving because they had felt the intention of the breach. Kaijin surged forward, diving behind the overturned sofa, firing 3 shots blindly through the smoke. Except they weren't blind. Eva, crouched behind the kitchen island, was watching the thermal feed on her tablet. Right side, 2 targets. Eva screamed, or thought she screamed, but Kaijin heard it as his own thought. He pivoted, dropping the 2 mercenaries before they could raise their rifles. Reloading, Kaijin's thought flashed in her mind. Covering, Eva responded. She didn't have a gun. She had something better. She threw a homemade chemical cocktail she'd mixed from cleaning supplies found under the sink, ammonia and bleach concentrated in a glass jar. It shattered against the tactical vests of the entering squad. The gas hit them instantly, choking them, burning their eyes. In the chaos, Han entered. He was a mountain of a man, wearing military-grade body armor and wielding a combat shotgun. He stepped over his retching men, scanning the room with cold precision. "It's over, Kaijin," Han bellowed. "Give me the girl and the drive and I'll make it quick." Kaijin stood up from behind cover, blood trickling from his nose, the first sign of the neural strain. "Come and take it." Han fired. Kaijin moved, but not fast enough. The buckshot clipped his shoulder, spinning him around. The pain hit Eva like a sledgehammer. She cried out, falling to the floor, her vision graying out. "Get up," Kaijin's voice roared in her head, not spoken but projected. "Focus, Eva, I need your eyes." Eva forced herself up. The pain was blinding, but she channeled it. She looked at Han. Through the sensor, she analyzed his micro-movements. His weight shifted to his left leg. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Roll left," Eva projected the command. Kaijin obeyed instantly, rolling left just as the shotgun blast decimated the wall where he had been standing. He was within striking distance now. He lunged at Han, and the two men crashed into the furniture in a brutal, bone-crunching brawl. Han was stronger, fresher. He pinned Kaijin to the floor, his hands closing around Kaijin's throat. "Die, you obsolete relic," Han spat. Eva scrambled across the floor. She couldn't shoot. She couldn't fight Han physically, but she had the controller. She saw Kaijin's vitals on her HUD, heart rate critical, oxygen dropping. She looked at the sensor override. She could sever the link to save herself, or... "Kaijin," she whispered, "trust me." She cranked the feedback dial to 110%. She didn't push calmness or adrenaline. She pushed pure, unadulterated pain. She broadcasted the sensation of every nerve ending firing at once directly into the shared network. It hit Kaijin, but he was expecting it. It hit Han, who was grappling Kaijin and inadvertently touching the conductive nodes on Kaijin's chest unexpectedly. The feedback loop arced. For a split second, Han shared the neural load. He screamed, his hands flying to his head as his brain was flooded with the raw data of two people's agony. That split second was enough. Kaijin, fueled by the adrenaline of the shock, drove his thumbs into Han's eyes, then twisted his neck with a sickening crunch. The silence that followed was heavy. Kaijin collapsed onto the ruined floorboards, gasping. Eva crawled over to him, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The link was fatting, the battery in the choker finally dying. The superpowers evaporated, leaving them just two exhausted, broken humans in a wrecked apartment. "Did we?" Eva coughed, wiping blood from her lip. "Did we win?" Kaijin rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. He reached out, his hand finding hers. "We're alive, so we won." 6 months later. The private island in the Andaman Sea was smaller than the Citadel, but warmer. It was a place that didn't exist on any map. Eva stood on the balcony of the white stone villa, the ocean breeze playing with the hem of her sundress. She wasn't wearing a lab coat. She held a glass of wine, looking out at the sunset. The scars on her hands had faded, but they were still there, reminders of the night in Macau. Kaijin walked out onto the terrace behind her. He looked different, less armored. He wore a linen shirt, unbuttoned at the top. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "The patents were approved," he said softly. "Shell companies in Zurich. The Chimera sensor is officially a medical device for treating paralysis. No military applications." "And the black market buyers?" Eva asked, leaning back into him. "Disappeared," Kaijin said, the old edge returning to his voice for just a second. "They realized that pursuing us was, statistically, unwise." Eva smiled. They had rebuilt, but on their own terms. She was no longer the naive scientist, and he was no longer just a mob boss. They ran a shadow empire now, brokering information, leveraging secrets, using the updated, safer versions of her tech to predict market crashes and political shifts. They were untouchable. She reached up and touched the thin, platinum band around his wrist, the new, wireless version of the sensor. She wore a matching one. They didn't keep them on full intensity anymore. That was too dangerous, but the low hum was always there. A background connection, a whisper. "Do you miss it?" Kaijin asked, sensing her thoughts before she spoke them. "The silence, the privacy." Eva turned in his arms, looking up into his dark, intelligent eyes. She remembered the loneliness of her lab, the cold hum of the servers that had been her only company. I was always alone, Kaijin. Even in a crowded room, she whispered. She tapped her wrist against his. The faint blue light pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, perfectly synchronized. Now I'm never alone. Silence is overrated. Kaijin smiled, a genuine, rare expression that reached his eyes. He kissed her, and even without the high-gain feedback loop, the electricity between them was enough to light up the dark ocean. Then let's make some noise, he whispered against her lips. The sun dipped below the horizon, but for the genius and the wolf, the long night was over. They had walked through the fire and found that the only thing stronger than the fear of death was the chemistry of love.